Why is the idea of preparation nowadays frowned upon? Before, the idea was that it was a good idea to save for a rainy day. Like a squirrel packing away nuts for the winter or something. You would work hard here and now so that you wouldn't have to work hard later, when working hard would either 1, be impossible, or 2, be significantly harder. But nowadays, the idea of preparation just seems to be a joke, doesn't it? When you think of a prepper, you think of some guy wearing a tinfoil hat and a gas mask, sitting in the bunker that he built in his own backyard, fiddling with a ham radio and eating an MRE beside a giant pile of guns and ammo. And people like that are considered by the mainstream to be conspiracy theorist nutjobs. Of course, some of them probably actually are conspiracy theorist nutjobs, like those people that tried to do prep by buying 552 cans of Mountain Dew.
Just sit here and sit here and then we can walk back out and get some milk. That's what you know. Straight up lie. What a liar!
He's supposed to lose his mind over
Such a liar.
some Mountain Dew.
I can
Over
leave
some
another
Mountain
time,
Dew.
but I will. I'm telling you, you're such a liar. You just told me just now that I can go outside and come back in and get the drink. That's what you just said. But that's what you just told me.
Oh no, you need to go fair, ma'am. You don't even need to.
You just said your attitude wasn't necessary. You lied to us.
Folks losing their minds up here for some Mountain Dew.
I guess these are just the parents of Movie Bob? But certainly not all people who prepare for disaster are conspiracy theorists. That's why you get comments like this from Mother Jones, who obviously lie through their teeth. The only conservatives who took COVID-19 seriously were the conspiracy theorists. This is demonstrably false. Regardless of how you feel about Tucker Carlson, he's hit or miss for me, here's him back in January urging his viewers to pay attention to the coronavirus.
In America's newsroom, impeachment is all that matters, and that should tell you something. In fact, it ought to make you suspicious. The world is changing incredibly fast out there, and it's fascinating and ominous and worth covering. But by and large, the media are all but ignoring it. Why are they doing that? Well, consider the stories they're downplaying in favor of a protracted government hearing whose ending we already know. For starters, at this very moment, a serious viral outbreak is spreading across China, the world's biggest country. In just a matter of weeks, this new strain of coronavirus has generated almost as many new cases as SARS did. Remember SARS? As SARS did in 3 full months.
I would not call Tucker Carlson a conspiracy theorist, just a regular conservative pundit. But the image of the tinfoil hat wearing nutjob is an evocative one, and I'm not surprised that there are elements of the radical left that have taken to using that image to bludgeon all people they disagree with. As always. For example, think back a few months. Whether you're conservative or not, doesn't really matter. If you voiced to, say, your friends, or maybe some people you know online who are relatively apolitical, your concerns about the coronavirus, did you get called a conspiracy theorist? Even if you're not a conservative at all. You probably did, at least by somebody. Did you get called a racist? Yeah, probably. There's no way we all have that bad of a memory, right? Like, I can understand some people not understanding, say, the 2008 election, or the 2004 election, or the 2000 election, or like that previous era of politics where it was dominated by the Bushes and the Clintons. I can actually forgive some really young people who truly believe that Trump is the worst thing to ever happen to the world because they're too young to remember or understand the devastating impact of the Second Iraq War and Bush's cowboy diplomacy, or even Obama's neo-lib backstabbery. I get it, man. I was a kid in the early 90s, but I don't remember the politics of that era personally. But really, 3 months. You guys can't remember the stuff you were saying 3 months ago. This is from January 28th of this year. Ontario School Board warns that coronavirus concerns veer into anti-Chinese racism. No one's publishing garbage like this now. Before coronavirus hit our shores, it was all, don't be racist, don't be a bigot. You're a Trump-loving xenophobe if you stock up for a potential pandemic, or if you don't go down to your local Chinese restaurant and eat the bat soup or something. Reading this stuff almost makes me feel like I'm looking back at a different era. The mayor of Florence, Italy, initiated Hug a Chinese on Twitter on February 1st, opposing anger towards China amid the coronavirus outbreak and calling for unity in this common battle. Yeah? How did that work out for Italy? I'm not saying that hugging a Chinese person is wrong, obviously, or that it caused the outbreak or that it exacerbated it. I'm saying that people who spent their time virtue signaling rather than preparing found themselves up shit creek without a paddle. So what happened? When did it stop being virtuous to plan ahead for your future? I think I've seen this brewing for a while, to be honest. When I was younger, I was as reliable as I could be. I'm still as reliable as I can be now. You can always get better at that. But like, basically what I mean is, when I said I would do something, I would do it. When I said I would be somewhere, I would be there. And I held other people to that same standard. And I was told in my early 20s that I was being unreasonable. You know, that if someone says, yeah, I'll be there at 4, and then they're there at 6, or they just don't show up at all, and they just apologize about it 3 days later, that pissed me off, because my time is valuable, and I don't want to waste it dicking around. But apparently I was being unreasonable, holding others to a standard. I wasn't being understanding, or I was being too rigid, or I was not understanding the power of spontaneity or something. Like, there was a lot of excuses people gave for this, but at the end of the day, it was just flaky people being flaky. And I think that has gone from, like, an obvious character detriment to something that people hold on to as part of their personality, because they think that their quirks make them who they are. Which, really, that isn't how personality works. Most people who say they have a quirky personality, what that means is they have a bunch of flaws that they haven't actually done the hard work of getting rid of. And they're making excuses about it by saying that, oh, they're just LOL so random. And even though I'm talking about a personal and interpersonal thing here, I think it does actually push into the realm of politics as far as social justice ideology is concerned. Because again, if we're going to go back to the whole valueless postmodernism thing, why is being on time any better than not being on time? If there can be no value judgments, then both of those options are the same. And that does bleed over into things like being prepared. According to this lens, there is no value difference between preparing for the future and not preparing for the future. Therefore, there's only moral judgment. Does your preparation out you as a tinfoil hat-wearing nutcase? Or alternatively, a racist? That's the only question that they're concerned with. And so, when the seriousness of a situation finally collapses in on these people, and they've done no preparation at all, they, too, find themselves up shit creek. Gone are the days of the victory garden, where the main reason people grew food in their own backyard was because they actually had to feed their family during a war where food was in short supply. And this was promoted both through the government and culturally, because it also drove food prices down, meaning that food was actually cheaper for the US government to buy and therefore feed their troops with. Not only backyards, but public spaces became gardens because it was a crisis situation and everyone had to pitch in. Compare this with the coronavirus situation. If you told people 3 months ago that you were considering planting a garden in the spring because of coronavirus and because you didn't know how much food there would be, or if there would be shortages or whatever, they would look at you like you had your head on backwards. But now, after planting season is already well underway in the United States, all of these people who are perpetually late to the game are now scrambling to try and plant gardens. This is all topped off by the fact that some governments and jurisdictions are banning the sale of seeds and gardening supplies because they're not necessary. How ridiculous is this? You're allowed to go out to the grocery store, where there's a whole bunch of other people who might be transmitting the virus, get groceries, which might be infected with the virus, and do this repeatedly as you need more food, being entirely dependent on the supply chain. But when it comes to buying seeds and growing your own for the remainder of the sunny season, nope, can't do it. You think a one-time purchase of seeds and then going out to the grocery store a lot less would be a lot more social distancing than constant grocery trips. But as it turns out, gardening itself is a form of preparation. You're not just going to the store and getting what you need. You're planting, investing, waiting a month, 2 months, 3 months, however long it takes to start getting your vegetables. And if the goal is to break the self-sufficiency of people who prepare and force them to be entirely dependent on the supply chain, the structure of the state and the corporation, this is exactly the kind of thing that you would do during a crisis. It almost seems like in our mad scramble for safety, we've killed ourselves. We killed ourselves from fear. We became so self-centered that we thought we would never die. And with this immortality just within our grasp, any possible threat of death, however remote or unlikely, became the thing that paralyzed us. And I'm not saying that fear of death is a bad thing. I'm not even saying that it's unreasonable. I get it. For an atheist like me, where there's nothing after death, death is the scariest thing. It means that, on some level, the world is just a trapping, and for each and every single one of us, behind all of this lies our own personal apocalypse. But does fear of death justify cowardice to such an extent that life is no longer worth living? Are people truly so weak that when a crisis finally comes for them, they run crying towards any authority they can? The state, corporations, doesn't matter. Screaming, please, I'll give you anything, just save me. I don't care what quality of life I have. I don't care how terrible it is. Just keep me from death. We always like to make fun of the radical left and how they keep bringing up Harry Potter, years and years after the series has ended. We always say read another book. But considering that they love it so much, you think they would have understood the core lessons those books had to teach us. Voldemort is a tyrant because he fears dying. He even says, nothing is worse than death. His inner circle's named the Death Eaters, basically a group of people who are so hopped up on their own arrogance and importance that they believe that they are above death. Specifically, that they're so far above it that it's like food to them, the same way that animals are food to humans. Meanwhile, Harry Potter, the hero of the story, recognizes death as being evil, but not as the paramount evil. That there are worse things that you can do while alive than die. And that when it comes time for somebody to simply die naturally, that death is not evil at all, but is in fact a companion, one that none of us will ever escape. When Trump got elected, they always viewed themselves as the heroes of that story. But when death finally seriously reared its ugly head within their lives for the first time, they all became Voldemort. Or at the very least, Voldemort's lackeys. The honest truth is, I don't even think the virus is that bad. Yes, people are dying, but more people die of the flu. Hell, more people die of heat stroke during the summer. And despite that, not having air conditioning isn't exactly illegal or anything. We consider these things like the heat or the flu or even cancer or other major medical problems as things that, yes, they need to be fought, but they are not worth destroying our society in order to fight them. And the coronavirus should be the same way. I think the mortality rate of the coronavirus is actually a lot lower. I've been saying this for a while now. I think the virus has mutated into an asymptomatic variant that has been at least partially inoculating large swaths of the population without anybody even recognizing it. And the reason that I think this is, yes, that Icelandic study, there are other studies coming out now of like Italy, South Korea, Spain, even China, for all the good that'll do us. But my point is, when you compare jurisdictions that have completely locked everything down and turned into complete totalitarian nightmare states, and other locations that have not really done anything, the decline in the acceleration of cases is identical. And that tells me that the number of people who are still capable of being infected is dropping. And that means inoculation. It sounds kind of strange actually, but Boris Johnson's idea of herd immunity was probably correct. But to tie this all together, I think the reason that preparedness is now frowned upon when it once wasn't is because preparedness shows people who don't prepare that they're vulnerable, that society may not always function exactly the way that it currently does, and they don't like to be woken up to that fact. And in the more extreme cases, they don't like to be reminded of their own mortality. Back in January, when somebody was saying, I'm going to buy 6 months worth of food, like me, because there might be a problem in the future and I don't starve. Yes, we were all called racists and conspiracy theorists, but we were called those names by people who had such unwavering faith in the system, not because the system itself is stable, even though it is stable, but because they don't want to look into the abyss of their own personal apocalypse. Because they fear death so much that even the idea that death will one day come for them is offensive. So they would rather shame you into being ignorant the way that they are. And then, when it can no longer be ignored, when the gravity of the situation finally reaches them, they switch from insulting you for being prepared to being willing to sign their soul away just for one extra breath. To me, it's not worth it. I'm not acting like those dumb spring break partiers who were saying, LOL, if I get the coronavirus, I get it, who cares, I'm gonna party. I'm not acting like those people who don't believe that it exists and are saying, whatever, I'll just go out and live my life regularly, and they end up dying. I'm not saying don't practice social distancing, don't wear masks if you feel like you need one, because those are also forms of preparedness as well. What I am saying is that the facade of eternal life that we've all been living because we're all relatively young and in relatively prosperous countries, maintaining that facade at all costs is not worth giving up our liberty. In all likelihood, this will happen again within our lifetimes. Maybe not a disease, but some kind of emergency situation. And if you feel the need to prepare for something, for anything, do it. And don't let anyone shame you into not doing it. Because in their shaming, they are revealing themselves to be a coward. And your attempt at confronting the future problem as forthrightly as you can will always be offensive to a coward.